If you've ever been anyone, and I'm sure you are, and you've seen Naruto, then you fall into either one of two camps, Team Madara or Team Hashirama. And if I'm being real, I'm Team Madara all the way. But since today's video is a commission, I figured I'd take the time to let you guys know before starting this video that I've actually done a Madara one before, so go check that one out after you're done with this. Oh, and before I forget, this thumbnail was made by Just OM. So yeah, with no further ado, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
We begin our story in the perspective of Izuku Midoriya, him being born as a baby, and his mother carrying him, saying that he's gonna do great things. We then flash forward a bit in time with a couple of cutscenes of Deku growing up and being strong, fast, intelligent, and resilient beyond his years. It would be magnificent the things that Izuku would be capable of. And on his very first day of school, as Izuku would be dropped off, he would say goodbye to his mother, catching a glimpse of another young boy in Katsuki Bakugo, somebody who he tends to play with every now and then whenever their parents get together, and with Izuku seeing him, he would walk over towards him saying, "Oh, you go to the same school?" Katsuki telling him that he does, asking him to remind him of his name again, Izuku saying that his name was Izuku Midoriya. With Bakugo being like, "Alright, cool Izuku, well, my name's Katsuki Bakugo, and don't you forget it, because I'm gonna be the #1 hero one day." Izuku smiling at him as he would say, "I bet." With confidence like that, anything's possible. With the two of them making their way inside the class. It's here where, much like you would expect, Bakugo would go on to do his own introduction, saying that he wants to be the greatest hero that has ever lived, someone just like All Might. Izuku going up and saying something pretty similar to him, which would rub Bakugo the wrong way. Which in my head would probably lead to a bunch of incidents where I could see Bakugo kind of trying to show off in front of the class, only for Deku to walk over and literally do the same thing that Bakugo was doing, but better. And that applied to everything. That applied to schoolwork, that applied to drawing, that applied to soccer, tag, kickball, duck duck goose, you name it. Deku was the best at everything, and that wasn't going to be changing anytime soon, because unlike Bakugo, Deku was never going to be developing a quirk, because Deku was already born with the capabilities and same potential as Hashirama Senju, which just off rip separated him from every single other person in the My Hero world, meaning that Bakugo was trying to amount or scale up to somebody that he just honestly had no business trying to. Think kind of how the Hashirama and Madara stuff happened in their youth. How Madara was constantly trying to get the better of Hashirama, but it just never worked. This would eventually culminate in the day where Bakugo would finally awaken his quirk, showing off and telling everybody that with this explosion quirk, he'll be able to rise to become one of the #1 heroes of the world. Izuku discovering that same day that he actually possessed the capabilities of creating clones of himself, and not just any clones, extremely durable clones created out of wood, also bearing the capabilities of creating wooden constructs like cages and toys and even tools, which would separate Deku's quirk from what Bakugo was showing off. So by the end of the day, everybody would be harping on about how incredible Deku's quirk is and not Bakugo's, leading this to amount to be the day where everything kind of just got turned on its head. And we would probably get some sort of interaction between the two where I could see kind of something like this going down, where Deku would notice Bakugo playing alongside some other kids, and as soon as Deku goes to ask whether he can join, everybody would say, "Oh, it's Izuku. Of course, dude, you can be on our team." Like they would be wanting him to join them. Bakugo would be the only person with a scowl on his face saying, "No, you can't play with us." Leading a Deku to have a shocked expression, just asking, why? Did he do something wrong? Bakugo telling him that he's not as cool as he thinks he is. In fact, he's not as strong as he thinks he is either, blasting a little bit of explosions in his hands as he would tell everybody that he's way cooler than Deku, right? All of them looking at him and just being like, I mean, yeah, just kind of like barely agreeing with Bakugo, pissing him off, leading the young boy to say, well, whatever, I'll show ya, as he would lunge towards the direction of Deku, attempting to blare an explosion. But Deku would simply sidestep it and ask Bakugo why he's trying to fight him, literally just dodging and evading each blow. Bakugo getting more and more pissed as none of his strikes would land, eventually leading him to yell, asking Deku why in the world he thinks he's so much better than him. Deku saying that he doesn't, as he would continue to evade, and some of the kids would end up eventually calling a teacher. Once the teacher would arrive and notice that Bakugo was clearly the bully in this instant, she would immediately reprimand him, telling him that he can't just do that to other students, and that's not a way to use his quirk in the first place. Bakugo scoffing, not really accepting any of the, fault at what just happened in this situation, and him attempting to get people to back him, but when nobody does, it would become clear to Bakugo that they all favor Deku over him, having that superiority complex that he always had since he was a child. And with that being the case, this would most likely lead to a sum of multiple incidents in which Bakugo would pretty much just be left in the dust at everything, to the point where Bakugo would be so pissed he would end up transferring because, it would get embarrassing at some point. We're talking chugging competitions, eating competitions, gaming competitions, and schoolwork competitions. Bakugo would always find himself in second place, and this eventually would all culminate in a day when they would all be in, say, 5th grade, where Bakugo, after having trained for multiple years on end in an attempt to try to defeat Deku and show that he's really the strongest, seeing as most of his friends would have actually all harped towards Deku since he was kind of like the popular kid out of everybody, he would eventually try to fight Deku one last time. But it would end in embarrassing fashion, Deku trapping him within a wood prison, not allowing Bakugo to do a thing, him completely unable to even destroy the wood prison, leaving Bakugo embarrassed and ashamed in front of everybody, him eventually being expelled, as the principal would go on to explain that Bakugo has consistently been harassing Deku every single day ever since the previous incident that they ended up having in preschool, Mitsuki apologizing for this and essentially having to transfer Bakugo out. This means that with the problem child finally gone, and Deku being pretty much like the only beacon of hope for that school, he would by default fill in the role that Bakugo had, but with a very, very different aura to him. Because instead of putting others down and putting himself on top of everybody, Izuku would have a personality that would seemingly lift him up, helping his classmates to control their quirks, giving them new and fresh ideas on potential ways to actually use their abilities. And that would just be a couple of things. Izuku would be so damn popular that his popularity would actually go on to linger in other schools, people consistently wanting to catch a glimpse of the young boy who seemingly was already stated to become the next #1 hero by, well, everyone. And with Deku continuing to be in that class, just lifting everybody up, as the years would pass, his classmates would develop confidence and abilities that they never thought possible, actually having the guts and desire to try to join a class like UA's Class 1A. So by the time that we would finally get to the point in the story in which the students would all be deciding where they're going to be going in terms of what their life's goals are going to be, the teacher would actually go on to say multiple people's names, saying that they actually want to go to UA as well as Izuku. Izuku smiling as his classmates would pretty much thank him, saying that the only reason that they feel any type of confidence in trying to join is because of him. Izuku saying that they're too much, that they're just praising him as whatever, with them all just being like, no dude, like you are the best. So with Deku and everybody else, finally ending the day off, this is when some of them would ask Izuku what his mom's making for dinner. Deku saying, I don't know, probably the usual, with them saying, wait, you don't mean? With Deku being like, yeah, probably, and them all being like, can we come? So some of the top students and greatest friends of Deku within that class, which is pretty much all of them actually, would end up making their way towards Izuku's house, him sending a text to Inko and saying that she better get to cooking a little more because his friends were coming over, her saying that she actually had a feeling, as she pretty much already sent a picture of the feast that was awaiting them, as Deku would be showing them on their phone and they would all just be getting super hyped for what's to come. This is when Deku suddenly would feel that there's a presence nearby, as under a manhole cover would shoot out a sludge filament, which would actually be taken care of before it even got the chance to utter a single word, because Izuku's classmates using their quirk and combination attack would send the sludge villain flying, with one of his classmates shooting horns towards it, another sending a wind blast attack, a smoke attack, a fire attack, and finally a water attack. So as the Sludgeville would be completely destroyed by only Deku's classmates, Deku would start laughing, saying that the guy ought to have thought what he was doing a little bit better. This is when out of nowhere All Might would arrive, his classmates about to attack as well, when Izuku would say, "Wait," as All Might would stand before them, all of them immediately freaking out and saying that Izuku would love to have his autograph. All Might staring at the collection of kids, all pretty much about to use their quirks, as he would say, "Whoa, you guys all have incredible quirks." Them going on to explain what their abilities are, one dude pulling his eyes out of his face saying, "Yeah, my quirk isn't that cool, but Izuku here's the best. He accepts me with all this." Another dude with crazy chompers saying that, yeah, he's only here for the food, but Deku's the best, so of course he had to come. And then, the extras in the class who don't have particularly strong quirks, just saying that they're just his friends. This is when All Might, realizing that everybody seems to harp around this one individual kid, would ask him what his quirk is. Izuku replying by saying that he just has a simple wood manipulation quirk. The students from the side saying, "Simple? This guy can create any attack you can think of out of wood, and it's extremely powerful. We once saw him create a 1,000-armed Buddha statue to clear the rain out because we weren't able to play outside. He's been like that ever since he's been, 11 years old?" All Might shocked by that as he would say, "Wait, he what?" Before he'd be like, "Nah, they're just exaggerating, honestly. I'm really not all that special." All Might looking towards him and saying, "Well, if you say so." One of the kids being like, "Not that special? Dude, you're incredibly strong. You'd be able to give most pro heroes a run for their money in the strength department." Izuku just saying to stop, that they're embarrassing him. All the while All Might would be staring at Deku, seeing the way that people just flock to him and thinking that he could be a candidate. Before suddenly, he would cough, and feeling a bit of blood coming down from his face, All Might would cover his mouth, going on to say that he best be off, his time limit about to end. And though nobody else would have actually picked up on that, Izuku most definitely would have. Him connecting the dots almost immediately and recognizing that that theory that he had made of All Might actually having been compromised, it might be true. So as Izuku would be eating dinner with his friends, he would honestly have a very, very hard time enjoying himself, just because he'd be thinking about his favorite hero that he's had since he grew up, and he'd be wondering what kind of villain could have possibly hurt All Might. Somebody capable of running extremely fast, punching extremely hard, and all in all just defying human logic. Deku would be a bit stunned, which would lead his mom to ask what's up. Izuku going on to confess that he just feels a little strange, that's all. Them all saying, "What? Strange? Do you feel sick?" Being shocked considering that Deku in his entire life has never once even shown a single sign of getting sick. Deku saying, No, it's nothing like that. I just mean All Might. Didn't he seem weird to you guys?" Them all saying that they don't know what he's talking about, considering All Might seemed just as incredible as always. His buddy with the stone skin quirk saying, "Yeah, he was awesome as ever," lifting his rock-filled hand as Izuku would look towards his friends and say, "Yeah, I was probably just, overthinking it." The day finally ending, as for the following 10 months, Deku and some of his classmates, which actually have complete aspirations to try to become heroes, would all train in the middle school gymnasium every single day for 2 hours before school, meaning that by the end of the 10 months, some of his classmates with quirks that normally should be relatively weak to the point where they really don't cause anything for the class would actually be pro hero level. Not like literally pro hero level, but like what I'm saying is like they could become pro heroes. So with that being said, once the day of the test would actually finally come around, Deku would walk inside, wishing all of his classmates good luck as they would all immediately be separated, sent into different sections of the block. This is where we would see Izuku, kind of eyes closed, continuing to think about that whole stuff with All Might taking place, when suddenly Izuku would realize that nobody was there. The test had already started. So making a quick move, Izuku moving at top speeds, doing the iconic shinobi run, would appear in front of the first robot before anybody could, them all being shocked with Ida being the most of all, considering his leg was already outstretched to kick this thing when Deku suddenly plopped in out of nowhere and with one singular punch to the robot's stomach, he had that thing coiling and exploding in an instant, Deku jumping from wall to wall as though he could seemingly walk on it. as he would land before an army of multiple robots, slamming his hands down onto the ground, leading to multiple wood beams and spikes shooting up through the robots, them all being immediately eliminated, as Izuku, weaving a bunch of hand signs, would then go on to create like 20 to 30 wood golems, which, lunging towards the direction of the robots that they were actually fighting, would start to decimate them, meaning that our boy Izuku, who's currently locked in as ever, would be just wrecking robot after robot after robot, eventually leading to the Zero Robot's introduction to the actual area, Principal Nezu questioning how he will handle this one, with Izuku taking note of it almost immediately and weaving hand signs, leading to a gigantic wooden dragon to pierce out from the ground and coil itself around the robot, blowing it up almost instantaneously before it even had the opportunity to trap characters like Uraraka or lead anybody else to even run from it. It genuinely happened so fast that if you blinked, you might have actually missed it. And with that zero pointer almost immediately exploding the second that it would land, this is when we would see Deku looking around, realizing that he went a bit overboard, as now simply sitting down and recalling all of his wood golem clones back to him, Izuku would go on to close his eyes and just wait for the next 2 minutes to pass, confident that he should have passed. Plus, it's kind of a jerk move to not leave robots for anybody, though it would be a bit too late for those sentiments, considering the fact that Deku already took care of most of the robots. But with that being the case, and after Deku would have passed this test section, we would have one specific character jaw dropped looking at Deku with rage seething from his mouth, which would be none other than Katsuki Bakugo, who, due to the fact that they weren't going to the same school, were actually lumped in the same area, and though Bakugo was capable of destroying a solid 3 robots, that was hardly enough to stand out among the crowd. Although while Deku here showed power the likes that even most top 10 pro heroes couldn't even show in all of their life. So we watch on as a pissed off Bakugo would leave the area, Deku swearing that he felt a familiar presence, as he would eventually leave, asking his classmates what kind of scores they got, which I'm just gonna spoil it now, due to the fact that Izuku's been around these guys a lot and he's been helping them out and encouraging them and helping them to get stronger. Actually, 3 of his classmates would actually manage to make it into Class 1A, having gotten some pretty decent scores. With one being the stone skin guy, who kind of reminds me of that one character from Sky High. I don't know if you guys get the connection I'm trying to make. The second one being the girl with the horns, who's able to shoot horns kind of similarly to what that one girl in Class 1B does. And even the kid with the big old teeth, the dude who has the muncher quirk, his quirk is kind of insane because in my head, just making it funny, it's just he rushes at the robots and he's able to just chomp on them. He straight up eats them. Think Wappo from One Piece. That's the type of activity this man gets on. So ultimately, those 3 being the characters that I most see being compatible with the actual examination are the ones that get in, with the girl with the wind quirk, the dude with the smoke quirk, and the girl with the fire quirk, as well as the one with the water quirk. I think the one with the water quirk is actually another, no, it's a boy. The boy with the water quirk, those 4 end up actually getting into the general course. And my whole idea for them, and the reason that they don't pass, even though obviously it seems like they would have sick quirks, is 2 things. One, the things that they're going up against are robots, and to say that most characters with wind quirks could actually tear a robot to shreds with that, it's just, let's keep it a buck. That's not very realistic. Saying that a dude with a smoke quirk, which, unless you're Smoker from One Piece or Smoke from Mortal Kombat, it doesn't have much, offensive capabilities. And then the fire quirk. The fire quirk, I really, really wanted to get her in, but I thought it would just be so much funnier to get the dude with the big old teeth into the class. So here's what I'm going to be having happen. The girl with the horn quirk, she's going to be replacing that one girl in Class 1B. The dude with the chomper quirk is actually going to be replacing Mineta in Class 1A. And the dude with the stone skin quirk is going to be replacing Koji Koda, the dude who has the ability to talk to animals and stuff like that. So yeah, not really much of a loss for Class 1A because if anything, they're low-key getting upgrades. So yeah, let's get into the actual first day of class, which is going to be kind of hilarious. What with Bakugo seeing that some of his old classmates are actually in his own class. I think that's just going to be sick. But anyways, what ends up taking place is that on that first day of Class 1A, we would actually see Izuku and all of his buddies from middle school, which obviously actually did make the cut for UA in one way or another walking to school, them all eventually going on their separate ways, with Deku telling them not to give up on their pro hero aspirations, explaining to them that what with the sports festival coming up, a lot of them will have the capability of showing off that, hey, maybe we do belong here. And I mean, after all, that test wasn't necessarily designed for every type of quirk archetype. He goes on to say that he's sure that there's a lot more quirks that realistically could have probably gotten into UA. So with that being said, all the students would say their goodbyes, and we would now see Izuku and his friends walk into the class, them noticing a familiar face, one which all of them rolls their eyes at, with the exception of Izuku, who even through everything that Bakugo would have done during their time of youth, never once thought negatively of him. So going over towards him, he'd say, "Kachan?" Bakugo looking up with a pissed off expression, just being like, Deku. I was wondering when you were gonna get to class, but I never expected these nerds to have actually accompanied you. What kind of bribery did you have to do to actually get these losers in here? Deku going on to say that they're not losers and that they're actually pretty powerful. To give them some credit, the stone skin guy pretty much looking at Bakugo and telling him absolutely that they deserve to be here, with the dude with the chomper saying, yeah, there might have been a time where we were under your boot, Katsuki, but that time no longer exists. Bakugo gritting his teeth as he would say, shut up, as he would be about to make some sort of grand declaration that he's gonna be the strongest when all is said and done, before Aizawa would wake up, cutting him off immediately and getting them all to make their way outside. Which is where we see Zuko having the ball tossed towards him, Mr. Aizawa explaining to him that he needs to do his best job to throw that thing as far as possible, all the while remaining in that circle. Deku saying, alright, sounds easy enough, as he would channel some chakra into his arm, enhancing his strength, before then tossing that thing as far as he possibly could, getting a grand total of, what do you guys think realistic ballpark for Hashirama is? Do we want to make it farther than Bakugo, or do we make it a little under, considering it's just physical strength? I think over. Let's go 1,000 meters. It travels 1,000 meters, shocking everybody. Is Zuko then kind of like doing that like arm stretch where like he kind of like roll it all the while grabbing your shoulder? As his two classmates from middle school would be like, yeah, that's right, Deku, show him, why don't ya? Aizawa noting them and being like, would you two like to step up next? The dude with the teeth saying, sure thing, as he throws it, getting an unbelievably average score. And then we got Stone Skin, who gets pretty much triple that, just due to the fact that his muscles do get quite augmented due to the fact that he's able to pretty much transform himself into a golem-like creature. So with that said, most of the other tests pretty much end up going more like you would expect. The grip shrink test being absolutely shattered by Deku, who not even pouring chakra into his arm would break the damn thing. Everybody staring at him and just being like, he's a monster. With the standing long jump box being absolutely cleared, the receded side to side steps leaving literal after images, and the 3 remaining tests just shocking everybody, them watching on as this dude has nearly infinite stamina. I mean, after everything was all said and done, the dude didn't even break a sweat. It was insane, and 2 of their classmates were acting as though that was no big deal. So with Bakugo being at the epicenter of everything and noting that things still haven't changed, he'd be pissed beyond all belief, just angry at himself, realizing that after all these years and after all this training, Deku still is just leagues above him. This would leave Bakugo to grab his things and walk out of UA, with Deku leaving his 2 friends behind to go and talk to him, wanting to, try to clear the air. But as soon as he would get near him, Bakugo would tell him to keep his mouth shut, that he doesn't want to hear him gloat in his face, telling him that he may be stronger now, but to trust him. Within these next 3 years, he's going to outwork everybody here, and he's going to make sure that one of these days, he slams Deku's face into the curb. Bakugo walking off, as Deku would have a slight smile and say, well, I'm rooting for you, Bakugo, him getting pissed off as he would yell back, shut up, damn nerd, as Deku would simply smile, and his friends would be right next to him being all like, this guy never will change, will he? Deku being like, nope, but at least he's genuine, as they make their way home, and we would then jump cut to the next day, which we all know and love to be the 2v2 hero battles, where in this timeline, something kind of hilarious is going to be happening, because instead of Bakugo actually going to face off against Deku and us getting that type of match, I actually want to do something a little crazier, which I think would just be awesome. And I think it's going to be really sick, which is pretty much amounting to letting the Stone Skin guy and Kirishima operate on the same team. I think it'll be kind of sick, because what could end up happening here is that due to Bakugo's, desire to win via knocking his opponents out, he would most likely end up rushing to the direction of Kirishima and Mr. Stone, who we're going to be giving the name Tremor, just because it screams rock dude, and I don't know, it sounds kind of cool. So with that said, Kirishima and Tremor make their way into the building, and Tremor would tell Kirishima that Bakugo's a hothead, and their best bet would be to try to get a fight with him in an enclosed area, somewhere where Bakugo won't have a lot of room to operate in, because from what he remembers, Bakugo's a heck of a natural talent. So with Kirishima nodding and accepting the plan, this is when we would jump cut to Bakugo and Ida in the bomb room, Bakugo explaining to Ida that all he needs to do is stay in the bomb room and keep watch, him making his way towards the direction of Kirishima and Tremor, where he would eventually end up finding one of them, Kirishima egging him on to follow along. And with Bakugo being the type of person to want to crush his opponents without leaving a single doubt about the victor, Bakugo would follow along, leading Tremor to reel his arm back and attempt to land a devastating blow. But Bakugo, half expecting something like that, would dodge, narrowly being scraped by the attack, actually being injured, realizing that freaking stony bastard hurt him. So launching a full-scale explosion at him, he would hit him, but funny enough, it wouldn't do anything. His stone skin has been hardened by years of Izuku launching multiple attacks on him, leading his eyes to start glowing purple, as looking more and more similar to the golem from Clash Royale, the dude would start swinging his arms crazily, Kirishima hardening and joining in on the onslaught, him taking more damage from the actual explosions themselves due to the fact that he can't keep up his iron-like hardening transformation as long as the golem dude can. So with Bakugo being on the back foot for most of the fight, eventually Kirishima would catch him off guard, hitting him in his ankle, forcing Bakugo to be in a compromised position where our boy Tremor just absolutely lands a wombo combo type strike at him, hitting him once in the gut, sending him into the wall, as pretty much turning into like a ball and rolling at his direction. He would send him crashing out of that direction, with Kirishima looking at him and kind of dapping him up, telling him that attack was manly. This is when Tremor would go on to explain to Kirishima that he should unharden, at least till the final fight would be over. And this is where I could see Ida attempting to keep the bomb away from them by using his super speed the whole time, but due to the fact that the room, even though it is relatively large, the pads and, pretty much like jukes that he can do while trying to carry this like low-key kind of heavy bomb are pretty limited. So in the end, I can see Tremor eventually taking Ida down and getting the bomb, with Momo probably saying something along the lines of, well, they did pass, they caused significant damage to the bomb and could have blown it up. Some crazy stuff like that, which even though they passed, they end up being told by All Might that she's kind of right. Eventually leading us to the fight between Izuku, which I'm actually gonna be choosing via a random wheel generator, which by the way, I'm low-key doing live. So his first teammate would be Tsuyuasui, and his opponent would be Jiro? Which I guess is kind of a weird one. I don't really see her being capable of doing too much, with her teammate being Ochako. I ain't gonna lie to you, that's low-key kind of devious, but let's run with it anyways. The event would all start, and I actually want Deku and who did I say his teammate was again? Was it Tsuyu? Those two to be the villains. So here's what I'm thinking we should have happen. I think Deku would probably end up devising a plan that involves not only himself but Tsuyu to make her also feel a little useful. So telling her to get within range of the bomb and putting her inside of a gigantic wood cage, he would say that in there, if they manage to get past him, she'll be the last line of defense. So nodding towards her and Tsuyu saying that's a pretty good plan, it'll be pretty hard to get through this, she would tell Izuku to do his best out there, as we see Izuku smiling at her and saying not to worry, that he'll do his best to take their opponents out. So with Jiro and Uraraka eventually arriving to the bomb room, them having, well, no other real strategy other than this, seeing as Deku wasn't coming to them, Jiro would start everything off with a supersonic attack, attempting to catch him off guard with that. But due to Izuku's crazy healing factor, even though his literal eardrums would low-key burst from the crazy sound waves that are coming off, Deku would tank that that and would use a jutsu that makes him act similarly to Kamui Woods, saying binding jutsu, with vines made of wood starting to surround each of them and encapsulating them. Izuku simply walking over towards them as he capturing them with his capture tape. Izuku would hear in the intercoms, "Hero team wins!" as the wooden crate that he would have created with Tsuyu inside of kind of like a mystery box would open, and she would say, "Wow, Midoriya, you're pretty damn powerful." Izuku thanking her for that, as we then watch Izuku ask both of them if they're okay, saying he didn't mean to hurt them in any way. Them saying that they're fine and that they appreciate his care, but they're still pro heroes at the end of the day, Jiro would say, so he shouldn't worry about them. Deku would nod, smiling, as after this would all be said and done, Deku would be the MVP of the entire thing, having deduced the smartest way to take down the heroes without injuring them and by keeping the bomb safe as well as including his teammate. So with him being the MVP, that would lead us to the very next day, which is where I believe we have that one incident where the reporters get in via Shigaraki, which ultimately would lead us to the Clash Rep situation happening, which ends up amounting to Deku actually remaining the Clash Rep. I mean, his personality straight up attracts people like a magnet, plus he was capable of deducing what was actually going on outside and letting everyone know almost immediately. Yeah, there's no way Ida's gonna sit there and be like, I would be a better Clash Rep. Like, none of that's gonna happen. And neither is the situation going to happen where Deku's like, you're much better than me, you know, because in this timeline, he is very much so confident about his abilities. So with that being the case, we end up pretty much entering the day of the USJ incident, with Deku pretty much telling everybody to just get on the bus in whatever order they want. Ida in the back just absolutely seething, being like, a straight orderly line in his head, with Deku questioning Ida on why he looks kind of bothered. Him explaining that he believes that as Clash Rep, he should be telling them exactly how to conduct themselves. Deku saying that he doesn't feel like he has to, explaining that if he's being real, he thinks that the best way to get people to follow him and try to actually do what he says is by giving them the freedom to decide when and why they're going to do it on their own terms. Ida kind of sort of understanding this, but still telling Deku that he needs to add some more order to the way he leads things. Deku saying that he understands and he'll try it next time, leaving Ida to be like, oh, like, this guy's kind of nice, you know what I mean? Like, everybody just loves Izuku in this timeline. So with that being the case, as the students would dismount the USJ bus, Izuku would say, all right, we're gonna get down in rows. Ida be like, just like that, Izuku. That's right, that's how you lead a class. All the while Deku would just be smiling, and finally we would see all of the students enter the USJ, which is where the Hero 13 would start giving her speech, and we would see Izuku looking around, feeling as though something was gonna go down. This is where I could see Deku going over towards Aizawa and would be about to say something. However, just before he would get the chance, the villain Kurogiri would appear and would begin opening multiple portals in the USJ, unveiling a bunch of villains, with Shigaraki and the Nomu arriving in the center of the USJ. And with that happening, we could immediately see Izuku just locking in, thinking that what he needs to do now as Clash Rep is protect everyone. So immediately going on to create a bunch of wood domes around his classmates, Izuku would turn towards Aizawa, saying that he apologizes for what he's about to do. Two wooden beams erupting from the ground as it would put him at eye level with Kurogiri, him going on to say that he's only gonna say this once, to retreat along with all of the villains or force his hand. And with Kurogiri telling him that he possesses no leverage, this is when Izuku would smirk, turning to see Aizawa, noting that he's already done exactly what he knew he would, deactivated the Portal Man's quirk. So the moment that Izuku would notice this, he would immediately send a wooden dragon to clamp its teeth around Kurogiri's simple metal part, Izuku telling him that one false movement and he'll be crushed. Aizawa looking towards Deku and just seeing that the air and aura around Deku completely changed. He was like a father attempting to protect his children and family. And honestly, to Aizawa, that was the most dangerous state a man could be in. So with Deku and Aizawa both lunging down to take care of the remaining villains, and Izuku creating multiple wooden clones, 200 to be exact, they would rampage throughout the entire facility, taking out each and every single one of the villains there, before Izuku would finally come face to face with Shigaraki, who at this point scratching at his neck and probably whining about how unfair this kid is, he would send the Nomu to attack Izuku, Deku blocking the blow by putting up a wooden barrier between himself and the Nomu, which the Nomu would hardly manage to create a dent in, Deku rising above it all among two wooden pillars as he would go on to tell the villain that this is his final warning, us watching as Shigaraki trembling through anger would order the Nomu to rip the boy's head off, with Deku replying, "Wrong answer." This is when suddenly beams of wood would go shooting around Shigaraki, restraining him, not allowing him to move a single part except his hands, and that would be more than enough, because immediately making contact with the wood, he would practically begin melting it disintegrating as Izuku would watch the wood decay before his eyes, immediately connecting the dot that the source of his quirk comes directly from his palms, or fingers, so immediately shooting new restraints towards him, he would restrain Shigaraki in such a fashion that he couldn't do a thing about it, Izuku smirking down towards him as the Nomu would once again attempt to land a blow on Deku, but it's here that Deku would not only parry the blow, but launch an elbow strike square to the stomach of the Nomu with black markings appearing on his face. This is when Deku's entire movement and strength would be augmented so much that the next barrage of punches would go on to leave concaved holes in the Nomu's body, it starting to rip to pieces, Izuku recognizing that this thing was no longer a human, as beating the Nomu to shreds, destroying every single piece and atom of it with nothing but taijutsu strikes, the Nomu's brain would be the only thing left, Deku stomping that thing out as Aizawa would watch on in complete awe. Having seen Deku land 3 strikes, though in reality, Izuku had landed more than 45 in that instant, and with Aizawa continuing to stare in Deku's direction, the boy would simply smile, as suddenly, black sludge would surround the body of not only Kurogiri, who was completely out of commission, but also Shigaraki, warping them out of that location, with Deku sensing that whatever was responsible for their retrieval was clearly dangerous. So with Izuku now confirming that every enemy has now been taken care of, those wooden prisms Izuku would have constructed for his classmates would immediately dissipate, Izuku turning towards them and waving, saying that they have nothing to worry about anymore. Izuku following that by bowing before Aizawa and apologizing profusely about his actions, saying that the only reason that he acted out of line was because he saw that Aizawa was going to try to face off against all of these villains on his lonesome, and not wanting his teacher or students to get hurt, he decided that his best course of action would be to, well, go all out. So with Aizawa telling him that he thanks him for his help, but next time to not do something as brash as that, Izuku would tell him that next time, he'll make sure to take that into account. Aizawa nodding, as it's at this point that they would have the cleanup, every single villain in the entirety of the USJ getting cleaned up, as All Might, barely being notified about this hours later, would be shocked, immediately thinking it to be the best course of action to give Deku one for all, because I mean, come on now, you don't just take down an entire villain attack like that, protect every single person and come out completely unscathed. That type of feat is completely unheard of, at least in a UA student. So this would lead All Might to decide that he's going to arrange a meeting with him after this little break of theirs is over. And with that being said, this is when we would actually zoom in to Izuku and some of his friends, not only the ones that he has from middle school, but actually some classmates from UA would all be sitting out at the dinner table with Izuku being asked what exactly went down. Izuku going on to explain that the moment that he recognized that the villains were there, he created wood domes to keep his classmates safe and proceeded to just use wooden jutsus and clones in order to take down the rest of the villains. Them all being shocked as they would say that they wish they had a quirk as overpowered as Deku's. Izuku smiling as suddenly the waitress would bring Deku his food and accidentally spill it. However, before it could actually do so, Izuku would catch it using his wooden quirk, creating a wood plate that would actually catch all of his food, with the waitress being like, Izuku saying that it's no problem, showing that he actually managed to stop anything from spilling. Her being impressed, asking Izuku what kind of quirk that is. Him saying that it's simply a wood quirk, with Kaminari in the back kind of just rolling eyes, being like, oh, there he goes again. Izuku being like, what? Kaminari just kind of like laughing, with his two friends being like, this guy is completely oblivious. Us then watching on, as what would take place next would essentially consist of a few days of Deku and some of his classmates training in their usual grounds, remaining in the middle school, seeing as Deku would have forged such a great relationship with his previous principal that Izuku's always welcome to visit whenever he wants. So when Deku showed up with more UA students, the principal would be accommodating to them all, kind of dropping little one-liners and being like, I hope you guys remember this when you guys are rich pro heroes, with the group all laughing and saying that one day they'll definitely help him out for helping them. This is when we would finally have the suspension for school finally end, with the students returning, where they would go on to find that All Might was once again hosting the class. They would have another little rescue hero event, something a little more similar, where the simulation is a lot easier, telling them that in a few weeks they're actually going to be having one that's a lot more difficult in scale. Which leaves the students very excited, seeing as they want to get stronger, they want to have more difficult challenges, leading us to the end of the day where All Might would finally muster up the courage, I'm saying it as though he's like trying to ask him out, to pretty much talk to Izuku. This is where we would actually end up seeing Deku and All Might having a little conversation after school, where Deku would pretty much be told the secrecy between All for One and One for All, being let in on the secret about his injury due to a villain, with Izuku snapping his fingers being like, dude, I knew it! This is where he would go on to reveal to All Might that he thinks he actually might have a cure. All Might staring at him, as with the look of confusion, Izuku would go on to pretty much create like a little wooden like knife thing and stab into his own arm. Where All Might would be shocked, asking what he's doing, Deku explaining that a long time ago when he got injured, his mom actually kissed his wound as he had scraped it playing outside, and when she did that, she was actually sick, but after actually accidentally ingesting some of his blood, she was just fine within a couple of minutes. So Izuku would pretty much theorize that maybe his blood had some sort of healing properties, sort of how like herbs in the forest heal as well, saying that due to the fact that his quirk is strongly connected to nature and wood, he thinks his quirk factor ended up evolving into something cooler. So with All Might staring at it and saying that he's not so sure about this, Izuku would say, what's the worst that could happen? It doesn't work, but the best case scenario, you're back to your prime, All Might. I'd say it's worth a shot. All Might staring at Izuku is closing his eyes, he would go on to actually take a little bit of the blood. This is when All Might sitting back down would go on to pretty much start like kind of gagging, as he would suddenly pause and realize that it tasted sweet. This is when staring at Izuku, he would suddenly feel his body start to get strengthened, and that wound that he had always had on his left side would actually start closing. His organs literally starting to fix themselves on their own, and I ain't gonna lie to y'all, this is straight up plot. Like, I'm pulling this out of my cheeks right now. There's no way that this would actually happen in normal Naruto, but come on, like, let's give this to All Might. Like, my boy is injured the entire show and isn't able to showcase how really strong he is. So for once, let me heal my boy. Anyways, yeah, All Might pretty much ends up getting healed, and with All Might having his injuries fully healed, he would look at Izuku, picking him up with a big ol' hug as he would thank him profusely, saying that he doesn't know how much this means to him, explaining that he's been to every doctor, gone through every surgery and tried every healing quirk, and nothing helped. But Deku managed to be the one to actually help him, and he will never stop being grateful for that. Him looking at Izuku and smiling, telling him that if he ever wants to change his mind on the quirk, it's his for the taking. Izuku nodding no and saying that he thinks that if that quirk was given to somebody, it should be given to somebody quirkless. Let someone else have a chance, you know? All Might looking at the boy, placing his hand on his shoulder and saying that he is a good kid. This is when zooming in after the end of a class, we would have Midnight telling Izuku that he needs to stay behind and talk for a bit. His buddies being like, oh, teacher wants to keep you behind in class, with Deku kind of just giving them like a little bit of a death stare, them all walking away and being like, dude, we were just kidding. As Izuku would close the door behind him and ask Midnight what's up. She would go on to reveal that seeing as a sports festival was coming up, which they were told about earlier, she wanted to let Izuku know formally that since he got the highest scores during the entrance exam, that student is always required to give the speech, specifically the first years. So with Izuku being given that responsibility by Midnight, he would nod saying that he won't let her down, with Midnight saying that he better not, or else he'll be punished, her extending that freaking whip of hers, with Deku kind of giving her like a strange look. It's at this point that he would say, well, I know, Professor, with Aizawa waking up a few moments later and saying, have you no shame, Midnight? "You're harassing my students." Her saying that she was just playing, come on now, as Aizawa would roll his eyes, and we would now fast forward to the day of the actual sports festival. Us watching on as a standing tall and proud Izuku would go on to give a speech which goes on to pretty much get everybody out of their seats and causes an immediate uproar of fan base towards Izuku. Because not only did this man just hype up his own opponents, but he had the crowd going nuts, and they're all waiting to see what kind of performance comes out of Izuku. So, with no time wasted and us immediately getting into the obstacle course, we start everything off to the sound of Midnight blowing the starter's pistol. Us watching as Izuku would blitz out of that area as fast as possible, weaving 6 different hand signs as multiple dragons go shooting out from the ground, completely collapsing the 0-point robots that were before them. Which leads us to see Izuku climbing up the body of a 0-pointer, standing on top of it as Izuku would signal to everybody behind him to come on, that he's cleared the path for them. It's at this point that as Izuku would watch people get more and more ahead of him, a smile would appear on his face, knowing that this event isn't necessarily about who gets first place, but more so about how they can get past. So with Izuku telling them all to, instead of fight against each other, help each other in every way possible, this would engulf a different energy around them. As Todoroki and Bakugo being the ones in the front, they would be the ones fighting for first place. Meanwhile, everybody else, who is willing to, of course, would be helping each other out. Izuku creating a bridge where normally they'd have to hop from pillar to pillar as they eventually finally arrive to the mine section, which is where we see Izuku run through it, having the bombs go off point blank, them dealing damage, but the damage being healed so fast that they can't even tell, as Izuku would tell them to take this path, with everybody passing more so in this event, leading to a packed, and I do mean packed, cavalry battle event. The crowd immediately noting that Izuku is an incredible hero prospect, because instead of focusing on whether he could make it in first place to impress the judges, he focused on helping others, and that is the essence of a hero. So President Mike hyping up the winner, which would probably be Todoroki or Bakugo in this timeline, would then go on to hype up Deku, saying that his style of being a hero was very different, but saying that it seems to have won the hearts of many watching, with people's cheers for Izuku going even louder and louder, although while Inko would be watching on the TV saying something along the lines of, "That's my baby," tears flowing out of her face. It's at this point that we would now go on to start the events of the cavalry battle, but because honestly I hate this event, I'm gonna be changing it for something else, a capture the flag event, which would sort of function similarly to flag football, because the objective of the game was that all of them were wearing flags around their waists, and the point of this was essentially that there would be 10 people on one side and 10 people on the other. So depending on how many people of each team managed to cross over or steal the flags, that would essentially result in their victory. Now, in case it was unclear, if 6 people from the enemy team managed to cross the other side, they win. If the people trying to stop them stop 6 people, they win. It's kind of simple. Anyways though, with the event almost immediately commencing, it would be a bit of a mix-up in terms of the teams, because the way that it would be selected would be at random, meaning that it could be general course, 1B students, 1A students, it really doesn't matter. And lucky for Deku, he actually just so happened to be lumped in with 2 of his classmates that unfortunately didn't manage to make the hero course, his buddy Smoker and his girlfriend Tanya, the one with the wind quirk, in case that's not clear. Anyways, with that said, Deku knowing that if he helps them put on a great performance, their chances of being helped into the hero course would have a bit of a sad expression, because seeing about 3 of his classmates that are already in class 1A are on the other team, he'd be a bit sad in knowing that he was going to have to cut their effort short. And so, as soon as the event would start, Izuku would place both of his friends in the most advantageous situations, allowing each of them to at the bare minimum get 1 stop, while Izuku would get 3, meaning that that would be 5 in total. This is when the other 5 classmates would nearly cross the finish line before Deku wood clones would appear, ripping off their flags instantly, with Izuku's team winning. Leaving our favorite obnoxious loudmouth hero to say, "You say that, people? Even UH General Course can pack a mean punch. Heck, I'm surprised those 2 aren't in the hero course." Izuku smiling and waving, with both of his friends thanking him back there for making them look extra good. Deku would go on to tell them that they need to be more confident about their abilities and train even harder if they want to someday make it to the hero course. Smoker saying that he definitely will, but it's a bit hard, you know, seeing as his quirk only pretty much makes him intangible. Deku telling him that that's exactly what he needs to do with it. Use that to his advantage. Become smoke. Enter dangerous situations and use your quirk to get out of them as though you were never there. You could be an incredible reconnaissance hero. And then looking at Tanya as he would tell her that if she continues to train on her quirk the way that she is, she may one day very well be able to shoot a tornado out of her hands if she keeps working. Her smiling and telling Izuku thank you, with the two of them saying that they hope they don't see him in the next 1v1 battles. Deku saying he hopes so neither, as the team would pretty much disband, and we would then watch as the 1v1 battles would finally begin taking place, all of the eliminations finally being over, with Izuku being matched up against his first opponent, who in this timeline, I want to say it's his buddy Xehther. That's the hero name that they both came up with. Izuku looking at him, with him telling him not to hold anything back, that everything goes in this fight, stretching out as he would tell Izuku that he's ready. Deku smiling, as immediately he would send a wooden construct which he knows would be easy to dodge. His buddy Xehther lunging straight towards it, as using these teeth that essentially work like a freaking chainsaw, this man proceeds to tear into the wood, leaving nothing behind. Deku smiling as he would say, didn't realize he got so strong, before then sending a wood clone towards his direction, which would do its best to avoid his jaws, eventually being caught off guard, with his buddy Jason telling him that he's been watching him fight for years. This is a cinch, lunging onto the clone, as tearing it to pieces via his teeth. He would then turn towards Deku telling him, come on, give it your best shot. Deku weaving hand signs as a wooden dragon would go flying towards him, eliminating him out of the ring before he could even get his teeth sunken into it. And with Deku's first elimination out of the way, Izuku would go over towards his buddy, helping him up to his feet. His friend telling him that he knew he couldn't put on much of a show against him, but he's glad he got to do something at least. Deku smiling as he would say he's sure he's gonna get some offers. His classmates smiling as Deku and he would both make their way towards the waiting area. This is where Deku's next opponent would finally be chosen, and it would be none other than Mina Ashido, who would have been an incredible participant in the previous event, but due to the fact that now she's facing Deku, it's sort of a lost cause. You guys could just imagine how many different ways Deku has of actually defeating his classmate, and whichever one you really want to employ, I mean, they all work. So with that said, Mina attempting to give it her best and try to show that she can maybe outmaneuver Deku would ultimately end up in a loss for her. Deku moving on to his third battle, which he would face off against Tremor, who actually made it to the quarterfinals after having taken down Kirishima in a long, hard-fought battle. Though, with that said, him knowing that now he has to face up against Midoriya, a character who he knows he'll never beat, he would simply be content with putting on a great show and showing everybody that he's not weak. So, as soon as the battle would start, Tremor would transform into his most powerful state, Golem mode, as he would then throw multiple attacks towards the direction of Deku, who would literally tank them body to body, fighting off against Tremor in a one-on-one fight, showcasing that Tremor actually has incredible hand-to-hand combat skills for somebody as clunky as him. I mean, if you look at his size, you wouldn't have imagined that he would fight with technique or precision, but after years of being in close quarters with Izuku, you kinda tend to pick up a thing or two. But with the match eventually coming to a close and Deku finally landing a full strength blow, which would shatter the rock protecting his buddy Tremor, leading him to actually hit his real body, he would send him crashing out of the arena. Tremor falling unconscious, with a smile appearing on Deku's face saying that he's gotten much stronger, his fist actually being slightly red from the amount of effort he had to pour into that. Him thinking that this is what happens when people are encouraged and pushed to use and train their quirks, as Deku would be waiting for his final opponent, with the next match finally coming and going, which would consist of Todoroki versus Bakugo. Now, this is where things get a bit contentious because I'm sure some people believe that since Bakugo actually defeated Todoroki in the actual show, he'd be the one to face him off in the finals. But I just personally don't agree with that take because of two factors. One, Todoroki was completely off of his game thanks to Izuku, and two, Todoroki didn't even bother using his flames in that fight. Even Bakugo himself could admit that he felt like he didn't deserve the win. So due to those two things, I'm gonna be saying that Todoroki would be the winner, and we'd end up getting a finals between Deku and Todoroki, which would immediately kickstart with the half and half boy shooting a glacier of ice, which Deku immediately counters by creating 10 wood clones, who while immediately sticking to the ice would run up it, stunning Todoroki, who looking from the bottom would see multiple Izukus climbing down that massive glacier he had just shot, and having wasted a massive section of the actual arena, Todoroki would be left with limited options, helplessly watching on with the clones getting closer and closer until he would notice, wait, there's 9, looking down as Deku popping out from the ground would unleash a devastating uppercut blow to Todoroki, which sends him into the air, followed by all of the clones smiling as they proceed to play kickball with Todoroki mid-air, him falling down to the ground completely unconscious, with Deku catching him safely into his arms, placing him onto the ground, with everybody just watching in shock and awe. This kid is different, they would all be thinking. And it's here that President Mike would finally start glazing Deku, saying he's the next big thing since All Might, as the symbol of peace himself would land in the arena, saying, "I am here!" The All Might theme song coming on in the speakers, with everybody being like, "It's All Might!" Him grabbing onto a mic as he would announce to the world that this young man before them today is going to be the next #1 hero, and follow him as the next symbol of peace, with everyone, and I do mean everyone, going nuts. We're talking headlines, we're talking people are wanting to interview this kid, people are like screaming in the crowds. There's pictures of Deku literally going viral, with a bunch of comments being like, is he really the next #1? Videos start getting published about people talking about the potential of Deku, how he might be able to surpass All Might, and all these crazy articles, which eventually ends up making its way towards All for One, who, now having a clearer look of the boy who impeded the plans at the USJ, would think that there must be something he can do about this boy. He has to have a weakness, since after all, every hero does. Us then paneling towards All for One, who would probably be doing that stereotypical villain cackle, like Dr. Ujiko being like, "Well, sir, what are we gonna do?" Him being like, "We'll handle it," or something like that. I don't know, man. Just something cringy like that. Just pretend it's animated or something like that in your head. But point being, after this would take place, the students would eventually return back to UA, where they're all tasked to pick their hero names, Izuku deciding that the best one in his opinion would be something that I'm going to be picking in the comments, because I ain't gonna hold y'all, I couldn't think of a single good hero name while I was sitting there taking a break from the recording. Like, I just can't. So I'm just gonna pin whoever comments the best hero name, and we'll run with that. And as for his internship, I mean, come on now, it's kind of obvious who he's going with in this timeline. The pro hero Kamui Wood. He has a word quirk, he's rising in the hero rankings, and Deku thinks that it would be pretty beneficial to get in contact with somebody like that. So with that being the case, and Deku having his selections out of the way, we end up getting into the actual hero killer arc, or the no hero killer arc, because in this timeline, the events that usually spiral into that happening just don't play out. I mean, no Deku being with Gran Torino means no Deku and Hosu. No Deku and Hosu results in, low-key, a bunch of bad things happening. But seeing as most of you probably already watched my videos, you guys know what I'm going to say. So, since there's no stain, there's no real arc, meaning that the events for this entire section of the story don't really matter. And instead, just think of it as like a filler section, where Izuku pretty much learns how to hero patrol and do some basic things around a hero agency, learning how it works and things like that. So with that being said, when the students would return back to class, this is when all of them would be given the horrible news that their classmate Tenya Ida has actually been paralyzed from the waist down. Them all being informed of the fact that their classmate was actually involved with a hero killer, a villain who has been targeting multiple heroes, Aizawa explaining that he believes that Tenya had actually gone off to try to defeat him after what had happened to his older brother Tensei. And as soon as Izuku would hear the news and see the expressions on his classmate's face, Deku would stand up, telling Aizawa that he needs to talk to All Might immediately. Him going to walk out the door, with Aizawa telling him not to bother, that they already have made arrangements for that, and he will go see Ida later in the afternoon, as soon as school is over. So with Izuku hearing that good news, he would tell Aizawa that he's sorry for acting rashly, Aizawa telling him that he understands why he would have done something like that. The day would come and go, and once that would finally be said and done, we would see Deku walking into Ida's hospital room, him watching his classmate completely lifeless on the bed, who now was in a comatose state. So with Deku turning towards the doctors, he would end up being told that he's going to be getting hooked up to a little like blood supply thing, with them draining some of his blood out and funneling it into Ida. Once this process would start, it would take little to no blood for Ida's body to literally start decompressing itself and for his spine to actually revert to its previous state. Deku watching on as Ida's face would go from contorted and in pain and like anguish to just a face of complete relaxation. Ida sitting up from his bed and going, "Stain!" as he looks around and sees his family members, Tensei, who's actually standing up in this moment, and Midoriya? It's at this that Tenya would ask what's going on, Izuku explaining to him the situation and how he used his quirk to heal him, with Tenya looking down in shame, saying that he had no idea about that had he known, he never would have interacted with the hero killer. He never would have caused everybody this anguish. Tensei in this moment would reprimand his brother, telling him that although he gets the sentiment, his brother, if not for Izuku, would have been bedridden all his life. And he would have probably blamed himself for that. He'd have been extremely downcast, with his brother looking at him and saying, "But we're lucky that didn't happen thanks to Izuku over here. So you better give this guy a million thanks, and once you're old enough to actually capture the hero killer, we'll go after him ourselves." Izuku smiling, is knowing that he had done his good little deed for the day, he would exit the room. Ida following behind him as he kind of like bows and like starts crying in front of Deku, and he's all like, thank you, which probably would result in like an emotional like anime scene, but seeing as, I'm kind of narrating it, it doesn't have the same impact. Anyways though, once this would be over and the students would return back to class, this is when they would be formally told about the UA final exam that's coming up pretty soon, as well as the practical section, which Izuku's not worried for. I mean, bro has godlike abilities in the world of My Hero, so there's nothing to be worried about if we're being real. So instead of giving you guys this boring little section of the story, I figured for the first time in a long time, we could actually just cover movie events. And what better movie to start with than the Two Heroes one? The one where we meet David Shield, Melissa, all that stuff. Pretty sure we've all watched it. Anyways, after the final exam stuff would be over and Izuku would have finally formally defeated All Might, we would see All Might extending an invitation towards Izuku, seeing as, he is his sort of successor, which leads to Izuku accepting and both of them making their way to Eye Island, where upon arriving, All Might would tell him to put his hero costume on, Izuku putting on that Hashirama iconic armor, with both of them stepping out. It's here where All Might would almost immediately be greeted by Melissa, who would question on who Deku is. All Might saying, "Oh, this young man is Izuku Midoriya." Her saying, "No, I know that, but I'm asking why you brought him with you." All Might explaining, "Oh, right, well, he's sort of my successor, you see?" Melissa going over to him and extending a hand, saying that she's seen a lot about him and that she can't wait to see what kind of heroic things he'll do in the future. Izuku saying that it's super nice to meet her. As turning to All Might, he would ask what they're gonna do first. Melissa would say that they've gotta go see Papa as they make their way towards David's office, where once there, David and All Might would kind of give each other like a little bit of an embrace as they end up catching up a bit, with Deku and Melissa going off on their own section of the island, her showing Deku around, asking Deku what it's like to be a celebrity, with Deku just smiling, saying that it's not so different, saying that so long as he doesn't think of himself as one, he doesn't really have to act or feel like one. And with Melissa hearing that, she would say, "What, really? You don't care for the publicity at all?" Deku saying, "No, what kind of heroic thing did I do at the sports festival? I beat up a bunch of my own classmates. I can't exactly get on my own high horse just because I did that." Melissa hearing that, she would say, "Wow, I guess I never thought about it like that." As she would go on to show Deku more and more sections of the island, where he eventually bumps into the rest of Class 1A, or at least a large sum of them. It's here that Deku, recognizing that some of his classmates came along, he would be super excited, greeting even his buddies from the general course, saying that he's glad even they could make it. Tanya saying that her parents almost killed her for asking to come here, but after a bit of convincing and saying that Deku would be there, they were fine with it. Smoker explaining that having him on their side definitely changes things a lot. Deku laughing as everybody then goes on to get another tour with Melissa helping them out, with Deku and Melissa finally making their way to her lab. It's here where she would ask Deku if she could actually run some tests on him, saying that she's been fascinated by his quirk factor ever since she found out about the things that he could do and saw the clips from the sports festival. Deku would say, "Of course you can." As stepping in towards this strange looking machine, Deku would have all of his vitals ran and a quirk scanner would pretty much go on top of him. This thing, however, would just glow red as it'd be like, It's pretty much indicating that Deku is quirkless. Melissa being shocked that she would say, "What? This can't be real. The machine's saying you're quirkless." With Deku putting his shirt back on and saying that it tends to do that, though he's not too sure why. Every single machine he's ever gone to in Quirk Doctor visit have all pretty much said he's quirkless, but you can't deny what he's able to do. So with Melissa saying that that's true, she would then think that maybe what Deku has is some sort of evolution of quirk, something like that, going on to look at his scans and seeing that Deku doesn't even have the evolution of the human body. He still has that joint in his pinky toe. She would find it so strange, but ultimately quietly decide not to question it. Whatever Deku has, and that's as much as modern science can tell her for now. So with that out of the way, we would actually watch on as Melissa would go on to invite Deku to the party later, him saying that he was of course going, with Melissa smiling, saying that she'll be seeing him there then. Izuku saying of course you will, saying that he actually has to head out now because he needs to get ready for the event later. Her saying of course, as she would pretty much wave him off and follow this up by making her way towards where All Might and David would be at. But strangely enough, when she would get there, she would notice that All Might was nowhere to be found and her father wasn't around. So looking at multiple rooms, she eventually goes to check on David's lab, noticing that nobody was there and walking into the office as silent as possible. Once there, she would hear the voice of her father on the phone with somebody saying that it's off, that he wants to cancel the plan. Her sort of overhearing the sounds of a man yelling over the phone with David hanging up. Her asking, "Dad, what's going on?" Him saying that nothing, he was just talking to a contractor. They wanted him to create a support item and he didn't exactly want to play ball. So they got mad and he hung up on them. And after Melissa would hear this, she would say, "Well, I'm glad you're not making dangerous tools." David saying, "Of course I wouldn't," with a smile. Him low-key feeling bad because deep down he knows that he has created dangerous tools. In fact, so dangerous in fact that they're actually going to come for it tonight, even with All Might there, which mind you, in this timeline is just not going to be playing out well at all, because this version of All Might has his previous strength that he had before. I ain't gonna lie to y'all, I stopped recording yesterday because I had an emergency pop up, so let's continue the arc where I left off. I'm pretty sure I was yammering on about how easy the destruction of Wolfram and his villains were going to be, so let's get on that. Post everybody getting ready for the actual event, we see them all meeting up in the same room that they do in the original. And once there, this is when everybody, after the compliments are finally over with, we see them all about to head to the party when suddenly the emergency defense system would come on. I believe that's what it's called. But yeah, that comes on, which eventually leads us to the section in the story in which we see a captured All Might forced to not do anything due to the fact that, well, they'll kind of kill people. So All Might sitting back and sort of seeing Izuku, both of them making eye contact, we would see All Might smirk, knowing that these villains just made the worst mistake of their life, because with his student being there, All Might has nothing to worry about. And we would watch on as All Might pretty much just sits there comfortably, smile still on his face, telling everybody not to worry, that they will be saved shortly. This is when Wolfram would kick All Might in the head, telling him that he's making a bunch of false promises, explaining that just for that, there might just have to be a little bit of bloodshed, leading a pissed off All Might to stare Wolfram directly in the eyes, him laughing as he would drop the symbol of peace, announcing that this is their hero, all the while the crowd would cower in fear. We would change our perspective back towards the direction of Izuku, where once there, we would actually watch him having busted out the side of the window alongside Melissa, seeing as she was the only person who actually knew how to deactivate the defense system. So, using his wooden quirk to create this massive, gigantic golem, which would almost immediately alert the villains, mind you, Izuku would start climbing up the side of the building, making his way to the top before even a freaking elevator could get there. And with Izuku arriving there alongside Melissa, Izuku would jump over the gate, being seen by two villains who would immediately open fire on them. But with Izuku's healing factor healing the one gunshot that actually would have hit him near the chest, Izuku would create a wooden structure to defend everything, all the while weaving hand signs as two wooden dragons would lunge towards his opponents. After taking them both out and having surrounded the entirety of the room with wood, Melissa would start getting to work and deactivate the defense system as fast as possible, leading a smiling Izuku to say that that should be it, as almost immediately you could hear downstairs that the heroes had gotten to work, and seeing as Wolfram had barely even had the chance to board the elevator, All Might had a one-way stop towards Wolfram, jumping into the actual elevator shaft itself and straight up plus ultra smashing that thing into little bits and pieces, grabbing onto David, All Might helping him, as staring at Wolfram, he would tell him, "I'll handle you later." As placing down his friend, he would then lunge towards him, metal warped gates starting to lunge at the direction of All Might, seeing as he was using some Magneto style powers, and he would wrap around All Might, holding him in place. All Might saying, "What is your plan?" Kind of faking being defeated, seeing as he wants to get the villain monologuing to understand the purpose of this, with the villain going on to actually tell All Might the true reason why they're here, that this whole thing was staged by his dear friend back there. David looking downcast as All Might would realize that it's true. but knowing that right now in the line of duty, he doesn't exactly have the time to waste on being down about his buddy having done something morally wrong, he would lunge at the direction of the villain, taking him out in one punch, Wolfram being shocked since from his point of view, All Might was completely restrained a second ago, but now his fist was inches as 1, 2, boom. It was lights out for the guy. All the while Deku and Melissa upstairs would be handling the scrap villains left, leading to a pretty clean ordeal where All Might, after discovering the true nature of the villain attacks, would question David on why he would do such a thing, him explaining that he's noticed that All Might's quirk factor has been slowly dying over the years, All Might going on to explain to him that the truth of that was due to an injury, not because he was actually losing his quirk. David apologizing and saying that he didn't know. All Might saying a little bit of the same thing, with All Might pretty much explaining that because it's him, he'll figure out a way to toss it under the rug. David thanking All Might as he would swear never to do something like this again, with All Might smiling and saying that Melissa doesn't need to know. This is when finally we would have a meetup between David, Melissa, All Might, and Deku, where after things have finally been cleared up, All Might would thank Deku, Deku saying, "So what, you took down the big bad?" All the while All Might would give him this big old thumbs up, and Deku would say, "I knew it." This is when, rushing towards the direction of his classmates, Deku would spot his friends asking if they're okay, them all pretty much saying of course they are, they're pro heroes after all. Izuku chuckling as he would say, "In training," before then looking towards a couple of his friends and saying, "And you two aren't even in the hero course." Them kind of getting a little angry with Deku, you know, kind of like punching him and stuff, all the while Deku's just kind of like chuckling because it's all jokes at the end of the day, which pretty much leads us to the conclusion of the arc. With this whole little mini section of the story finally being over, we can now get into what happens next, which, speaking of, I actually low-key need to check the MHA timeline. I believe it was the Force Training Camp arc though? Let's see if I'm right. Okay, 2 heroes, yeah, Force Training Camp. Okay, once this whole arc would finally be over, normally we would actually end up getting the Class 1A swimming competition. Y'all remember that whole thing Kaminari and Mineta put together just to peep on the girls? That was just devious. Anyways, Force Training Camp. What ends up taking place here is that the initial stages of this arc pretty much play out much like you would expect. I mean, obviously now you have Deku, who's like in a different position in the class as class rep, but when it comes to Class 1A facing off against Pixie Bob's little like mud clones and stuff like that, I mean, it's not much of a big deal. And although Deku would typically use his wooden golems in order to fight those mud ones, he decides to opt not to, considering the fact that this is supposed to be an training exercise for his class. So sort of remaining in the back and only having to take out some monsters when it's absolutely necessary, Izuku would help his companions out, staging multiple different attacks and leading the entirety of the class to finish it 1 hour early. Mind you, it's not because he was going throughout the whole thing destroying them faster. He was just leading in an organized fashion, with only a couple of people not really participating in that group, which would most likely be Katsuki, Bakugo, and Todoroki, who both think that they're, well, above it all. And with that being the case, we end up having a couple of normal days worth of training exercises until eventually the Vanguard Action Squad would finally attack, which is going to be changing significantly in this time due to 2 factors, which pretty much amount to the name Deku and All Might, and you'll be seeing what I mean by that later. But anyways, with this all kickstarting, we would essentially watch on as Deku would witness Koda leaving the camp and following alongside him, which luckily the fact that he did means that he would end up saving the boy's life from Muscular, who, arriving with clear attempts to straight up slaughter the boy, would immediately transform into his muscular state, Izuku pushing Koda away via a wood slide that would actually lead Koda to the bottom of the mountain, all the while Deku, turning his attentions towards Muscular, would ask him why in the world he'd be willing to crush a child with his fists, Muscular saying something like, "Huh, can't believe you would even ask a stupid question like that, kid, because it's fun!" Throwing a punch towards the direction of Izuku, which he would actually block with one hand, stunning Muscular, who without being able to push any more force into his fist, would have an expression of, "What the?" All the while 6 wooden pillar things would come out, latching onto Muscular as a gigantic wooden shrine door thing would fall on his back, embedding the villain onto the ground, leaving him completely immobile, while Izuku would go down to check on Koda, who was perfectly fine by the way. This all amounting into Deku getting on his back and saying, "Well, don't worry," when suddenly a massive, and I do mean utterly massive, sonic boom-like attack would be heard in the distance, shaking the trees and causing Koda to have to kind of bury his face into Deku's shoulder, or else he would have gotten hit by the wind and like dust and debris, which Deku would go on to understand that there's only one person who could have caused that: All Might. So lunging towards the direction of the actual heroes by jumping from tree to tree, Deku would arrive back at the UA training grounds, where Deku would notice one thing, being the utter annihilation of most of the teachers, since All Might would have quite literally been out there taking a bubble bath, just enjoying himself, seeing as he had trained the kids all day. Then suddenly All For One and his freaking goonies arrived and started just beating the life out of everyone. Like, I do mean it. Like, all of the heroes that were normally there in terms of the Wild Wild Pussycats, Aizawa, and even other members, they're completely out of the count. Although All Might, finally having heard the rubble, had to quickly change into his hero, or it would low-key might even be funnier if he has like bubbles covering him. You know, like how in anime they'll do that. Low-key, I feel like that'd be hilarious. No, or like a bath towel. He has like a bath towel covering him, right? As All Might's like throwing this crazy punch, his bath towel literally like flies off, hits Mineta in the face, and why Mineta? All right, anyways, point is, Deku arriving and seeing that All Might was currently going blow for blow with whoever this masked man was, would suddenly have an attack launched at him in All Might's previous weak spot. All Might tanking that thing like a champ, as launching a counter strike towards the direction of All For One, All Might would start beating this man down, who would question, "How did you get so strong?" All Might revealing that his former weakness is no longer holding him back, reeling his arm back and landing a United States of smash blow directly on All For One's face, sending the man crashing into the wall as he would be completely unconscious, with us being left to watch as the symbol of peace would raise his hand in all of his glory and stare down the remaining villains. Suddenly, a warp gate would arrive, which would teleport each and every single one out of there, including All For One. All Might letting out a gut-wrenching cry, screaming, "No!" just like he would have normally when Bakugo was teleported away, something similar to that. All the while we jump cut to Dr. Ujiko going, "Master! Are you okay?" rushing to the aid of All For One, immediately beginning to heal up All For One. All the while on the hero side, we would have Izuku going over towards All Might, creating like a wooden pillar in front of him so that it covers his, area, and we would see All Might telling Deku thank you for that, all the while explaining that the villains have gotten far more dastardly, explaining that the small-time threat he thought the League of Villains once were is officially now backed by the greatest villain of all For One. All Might going on to explain that that's the person he had told him about, with Deku nodding, saying that now with his healed body, he should be able to handle him, right? All Might saying that he doubts it, that the next time that he faces that man, he will likely have found a way to recuperate himself as well as grow far stronger. Looking at Izuku as he would tell him that the day might soon come where Deku will have to take his quirk. Deku nodding understandingly, but telling All Might not to worry, that so long as there's heroes here to stand up against evil, they should be fine. Him looking towards the direction of his classmates, who all seemed to be fine and actually were attempting to put up their own fight against All For One, who obviously would just blow them back, would then lead to the cleanup of the day happening, in which police would arrive, they get everybody's statements, and Momo would reveal that she had actually put a tracking device on the Nomu. However, in this timeline, once they would go to check out both facilities that they had clues on, they would be empty, with us completely skipping the Camino raid arcs, considering the fact that, there's no real reason for it to happen if Bakugo doesn't get kidnapped, plus when they did try to raid it, All For One isn't there, so with no fight, there's really not much story to cover. So instead, I think we should just focus on the provisional hero licensing arc, which normally I tend to skip over, but I'll low-key cover it a little bit, even if it's just to Aura Farm Deku. There would be 3 major interaction changes in this timeline that I could see. One, being that one kid from Shukutsu High. Honestly, I low-key just made that name up. That one kid from the other school who kind of looks like Deku, but like taller and more buff. When he walks over towards them and starts having that fake personality, Deku's like friendly face and like attitude just immediately shifts, and instead of continuing to be on that friendly timing, Deku just acts shy to him. His classmates all wondering what's going on, with him telling them that he just does not like fake people. That's the reason that even though most people don't like Bakugo, he does. It's because even though he's a jerk, admittedly, Bakugo would be like, "Hey, shut up, damn nerd." Deku would look at him and say, "He's real. He never acts like somebody that he isn't." Everybody kind of just looking at him and being like, "Yo, that's valid." Bakugo being like, "Yeah, that guy was faking his personality. Anybody could tell. But instead of harping on some extras, why don't you extras start finally thinking about how you're gonna pass this test?" Deku looking at him and saying, "See? He's right, as we all pretty much make our way inside, and this is when they would take the first portion of that provisional licensing exam. That section where they have to like hit each other, lock each other out with like the red balls. That section would be absolutely sick, because we essentially get a montage of Deku commanding the entire class to use their quirks in perfect sync, that we have all of them literally lunge towards the direction of the other classes who were all attempting to berate them, mind you, and straight up flip the script entirely. All of those students immediately being eliminated within a 20-second time span, as Deku would pretty much land on the ground flipping his long Hashirama hair and raising his hand, pretty much announcing to everybody that Class 1A stands at the pinnacle of everything. Inasa watching from a distance as he'd be like, "That's incredible," like super hyped up to face off against them, with the next event then taking place, which I believe was pretty much just rescuing people, if I'm not mistaken, where things are going to go a little bit differently. Because due to Deku's leadership skills, because you know, he's kind of Hashirama Senju, this man proceeds to lead Class 1A into the battle against Gang Orca via splitting off the people who he believes would be more useful for helping people and the people who would be more useful for taking out large numbers of opponents. This would lead Izuku and a bunch of different classmates to rush over there, where they would encounter that Todoroki was actually facing off against Inasa. Deku yelling out immediately, "Get your head out of the clouds, Todoroki! We're taking an exam, and if you don't feel like cooperating with us, then you can just get lost!" Todoroki giving Deku a glare, with Deku giving him a stare back of just like, "You better listen to me." Like, this man's aura was straight letting loose in that moment and even scaring Gang Orca. So Todoroki kind of just being like, would finally cooperate. Todoroki being part of the efforts to actually defeat Gang Orca, which would be pretty quickly considering the amount of students that were all lunging towards him, with Inasa taking out most of the fodder, and by that I mean the sidekicks that were with Gang Orca, which ultimately leads to the cleanup of the villain being taken out in like, what, 30 seconds the moment that Deku had arrived. It'd be pretty damn efficient to say the least. And with those efforts finally being over and Deku remaining to stay by Gang Orca, he would send literally everybody else to help out in the hero rescuing efforts, using each and every one of their individual quirks to try to help out in every way possible, with the proctors almost immediately deciding that Deku is practically already better than most pro heroes, with leadership that rivals the top 10 hero agencies in the entirety of Japan. Were they kidding? The entire world. So with that exam finally being over and even Bakugo passing this time around, which, shocker, we would actually end up getting into the next arc, which would be the overhaul arc, which would all kick off with the big three finally making their introductions to the story, and with Mirio challenging the entirety of Class 1A to a fight, which would have been his first big mistake, considering the fact that this version of Deku isn't the one that we're all accustomed to. Deku immediately recognizing that somebody willing to take on an entire class, even if they are first years, must have an incredibly unpredictable or powerful quirk. So Deku, in an attempt to assess the situation, he would send out his boy Tremor out to pretty much test out the waters, knowing that he and Kirishima, as well as Sato, all three of them out actually, would all be best suited in order to see what kind of tools Mirio has at his disposal. And with Mirio deciding to completely ignore them, rushing towards the weakest links of the class, Deku using his wood quirk would create a defense system for them, making it so that Mirio would have to get into a one-on-one clash against him first. However, to his surprise, Mirio's fist would phase right through his body and still go on to hit some of the girls in the back of the classroom, Deku recognizing that that quirk is going to be extremely difficult, due to the fact that in order to actually land a blow on Mirio, he's not only going to be having to move incredibly fast, but also predict where Mirio's going to strike, and the only actual spots that he could consistently hit properly are most likely going to be the spots that he creates an opening with. So with Mirio lunging towards his next opponent, pretty much taking them down one by one from weakest to strongest, Mirio would go to throw a punch towards the direction of Tsuyu, Izuku arriving before Mirio could even throw it and predicting where the punch would land. Mirio taking note of this, but his hand moving so fast that he was barely able to react, and so his fist would ram right into the hard as steel knuckle of Izuku, which would immediately cause a bunch of pain to rattle through his fist, him phasing through Deku and continuing to punch forth towards Tsuyu, which would still cause significant damage, but due to the fact that his fist got like straight clobbered by Izuku's elbow, which he just like, yo, like how is it that hard, would end up pretty much leading Mirio to leap back, going, whoa there, you got an impressive quirk. Deku going on to create like 50 clones made out of wood, with them all in an attempt to defend their classmates, telling everybody to up their defenses and to expect the unexpected, which ultimately leads to most of them being dwindled down until Deku would be one of the last people standing, Mirio using a misdirection type attack by feinting to poke Deku in the eyes before punching him in the stomach, Deku catching his fist, Mirio phasing right through him with an ultimate standstill happening, Deku smiling thinking that this battle's fun, until Aizawa would stand up and be like, "That's enough. Mirio, I believe you've made your point. You've already clobbered my students and I don't need you to end up being clobbered as well." Mirio stopping as Izuku and his fist would both like pretty much instantly come to a halt, and we would then see both of them kind of have like a disappointed expression. This is when Mirio would like pretty much just start giving Deku all the props in the world for saying that All Might was right when he said he was going to be the next #1. What the heck? His quirk is incredible, and he was fighting him without even using his wood side of it, considering the fact that he would pretty much be impervious to it. All the while Izuku would tell him that a quirk like that and a fighting style like that, it's unheard of, asking how did he learn to do that? Mirio explaining that he actually learned how to fight in that way due to his mentor Sir Night-Eye. Him pretty much extending an invitation out towards Deku immediately, with the young boy also accepting. This would lead to Deku going to the Sir Night-Eye agency, where due to the fact that he's responsible for the healing of All Might, and he's not even the user of One for All, I could see Sir Night-Eye actually having significant respect for Deku, plus due to the fact that Sir Night-Eye can see the future, him knowing that Deku gets the stamp in any world possible, he would not do that test for him, simply signing off his little stamp and telling Izuku to go on a little hero patrol with Mirio. This is where the big fight against Overhaul would actually take place this time, due to the fact that A, we have Mirio, and B, we have Deku, who in this timeline is not about to let a little girl literally go back to her torturer when he can stop it now. To hell with the rules, Deku would think. So the second that Overhaul would arrive and Deku would understand the situation, Deku would give Mirio this look, forcing Overhaul to take off his glove. However, Mirio reading the room perfectly, he would phase into the ground, appearing behind Overhaul and punching him square in the back with a full strength punch, leading Overhaul to be lifted into the air and 3 spikes to shoot at the direction of Overhaul, piercing his body with Overhaul screaming out in pain, then using his quirk to overhaul the wood in an instant as well as his body, telling the kids that they're strong, before then asking, but are they strong enough to stop this, placing his hands on the ground as he would start to deteriorate a building nearby, asking what they're gonna do about the people inside. Deku immediately creating a wood construct to support the building, with Overhaul smiling, saying that that's a neat quirk, while staring at Eri, telling her that unless she wants these 2 boys to die, she will come back. And with Eri immediately letting go of Deku, this is when suddenly Izuku, latching onto her with his wood clone, would grab her and pull her away, telling her that she doesn't have to worry, that he promises that within 10 seconds, this will all be over for good, leading to a gigantic golem creature being created, which at lifting its fist and like punching Overhaul, completely hitting him with like a KO punch, would leave Overhaul out of the count, Mirio having used himself as a distraction, with a bunch of damage being done to the building nearby. This is when, after reporting the situation to Overhaul, Sir Night-Eye would go on to explain to the 2 of them that he's proud about what happened, going on to say that when he had read Deku's future, he saw this playing out. And having done that, this is when Izuku would be given some props by Sir Night-Eye, as they would go on to reveal the existence of Eri, and after that would take place, Aizawa, much like in the original, would go on to be her primary caretaker. This would lead us to 2 arcs, I believe, which essentially get skipped over, with one being the, I believe it was the actual Overhaul arc where they do like the raid, and the second one being the, what was it called, the remedial course arc. Seeing as everyone in Class 1A ends up passing in this timeline due to Deku helping, this means that those 2 arcs are completely skipped over. And because the UA School Festival arc does introduce Sir Night-Eye, I guess I'll kind of cover the fight, which won't really be much of a fight. It'll straight up just be Gentle being like absolutely annihilated, because he ends up facing off against a very serious Deku, who, knowing that Gentle's planning to quite literally put a stop to Eri's first like good experience in her life, he's not having it. So using a wooden construct dragon, he would send it off towards the direction of Gentle Criminal, who redirecting himself thanks to his quirk would pretty much end up leading the dragon to shift its attention and pretty much follow him no matter where he goes, growing in size more and more as Deku would be unleashing more and more chakra, it eventually clamping down on the villain, who even with the love beam that La Brava would be able to use, he would stand no chance at even attempting to overwhelm it. And with that happening, the UA's festival goes by as smoothly as possible, us eventually having one of the coolest fights in the series actually be replaced by All Might in the high-end versus Endeavor fight. Since All Might, well, is fully in his, I keep stuttering. Since All Might is now sort of fully in his prime, like obviously he's regressed due to age, he would be more than capable of taking out the high-end Nomu, which would be more of a test for the villains in order to run, and then it would lead us to the next arc, which would be the joint training arc alongside Class 1B, resulting in one of the most boring arcs in My Hero Academia. Like, can I be real with y'all? Like, let me just have a little bit of rant. Let me have this. I watched this season with my girlfriend, mind you, and I had to sit there telling her, trust, it'll be worth it. I know this is boring, but it'll be worth it. All the while me and her were both bored. I mean, this arc is straight up garbage. It could straight up be considered as filler. This is not even along the same levels of the season 1 first arc, which I'm pretty sure we can all remember for its legendary music, the cool fight, which wasn't even much of a fight if we're being real, but just the music, the stakes, and all that other stuff, it made it cool. But this, bro, don't nobody care about Class 1B. They are the most extra characters I have ever, and I mean ever, thought of. Like they're trash, bro. They're garbage. Anyways, getting back into the story, I think that following the nature of All For One having all of his attacks take place during a training camp arc would lead to the perfect segue to All For One eventually arriving right where the students are with a brand new body in tow, Kurogiri, and a lump sum of Nomu, which would all immediately put Class 1B and 1A to the test and seeing just how much of heroes they are. And this is where we see the line between hero and civilian be drawn, because though some people would rise to the challenge of facing off against the final boss, most of the other students that are there are just not ready and don't have the experience required. So while we see Deku immediately getting into his fighting stance and creating multiple, and I do mean multiple, of his clones in order to take out a bunch of these no moves, this is when All Might, smiling towards the direction of Izuku, would nod, telling him to keep them distracted. He'll handle All For, when suddenly a pillar would go striking right through All For One's or All Might's body, piercing the man, leading him to cough out some blood. As grabbing onto that pillar, he would snap it in half, lunging towards the direction of All For One, who in a weird maniacal voice would say, "Finally, brother, you've come home," grabbing onto the neck of All Might and draining him completely of his quirk factors, before suddenly landing a death blow damage to All Might and tossing him on the ground to bleed out. This sight would piss Deku off to no end, who immediately, using his strongest attack that he has at his disposal, he would go on to create the biggest giant Buddha statue with 2,000 arms, as each one would rise and it would start pummeling down to the direction of All For One, who now showcasing the strength of his new power in the absorption of the quirk of his sibling. This man would grow even more powerful, capable of actually going toe to toe with this version of the statue, as the punches would start flying and each one would cause crazy recoil that the city, the school, and the students themselves would all be blown back by, with the shockwaves eventually completely destroying the mask that All For One was wearing, revealing that it was Shigaraki. So with Deku understanding that this villain had literally even used his own successor's body for his own benefit, this would piss him off to no end. Understanding that this dude's villainy literally knows no ends, as powering through more, Izuku would go on to insert even more chakra into the Sage Golem, with black markings appearing on his face, empowering the golem itself. This ultimately results in All For One's each and every little particle of his being completely obliterated by this golem, who completely goes on to destroy everything that All For One stood for, leaving nothing but straight up dust where All For One should have been. And as Deku would finish the attack, he would stand there proud, barely, and I do mean this, barely having been drained of chakra due to his excessively massive chakra pool. And with him turning towards the students and asking if they're okay, he would notice that his clones had effectively protected everybody, and I do mean everybody, having used wooden domes in order to protect the students who had no means of defending themselves, and using wooden walls in order to keep the damage to a minimal, meaning that even though the outside was, definitely impacted by the massive fight in scale, it wasn't as crazy as you would expect. And with Deku looking around, this is when a smile would appear on his face, with Deku realizing that it was all over. Him smiling as immediately remembering the state All Might was in, Deku would lunge towards him, cutting a piece of his arm as blood would start leaking onto the open wound of All Might, and the wounded hero would stand up stronger than before, asking Izuku what happened, him explaining that he had to go all out, with the now quirkless All Might standing up and saying that he truly didn't need One For All, did he? Izuku saying, "No, I didn't." As All Might would smile, and we pretty much end up having an inauguration for the youngest hero in history to actually be selected. Izuku being given the honor of actually graduating early and straight up almost immediately hopping into the top 10 hero rankings from the moment that Izuku was made a hero. Because the moment he starts his agency, Deku would go on to pick some of the most helpful sidekicks that he could. People with quirks that you would think, oh dude, they can't be heroes, but he makes the absolute most of them and goes on to become the strongest, most versatile agency in the world, because unlike other heroes, Deku could be in multiple places at once, and that's partially thanks to his wooden clones, which means that, ladies and gentlemen, is where I'm going to be wrapping up this one. Let me know what you guys thought about it down below in the comments. I definitely had a blast making this one just because it was kind of different. I mean, I never really thought to myself that I was ever going to finally go through with the Hashirama one, even though I'm not going to lie, it's been one that I've wanted to do for a while. Something's always just told me hey, maybe don't do that video. Do Madara, do Sasuke, do whoever else first. But, now that it's done, I'm pretty happy that I did. And let me know what you guys thought about it down below in the comments, what you guys would have changed, and if you guys have any harps on the way I handled the story. But with no further ado from your boy Xehther, peace.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Like it or die! That wasn't the line, Kachan! Whatever!